let's see if we can finish this radio off in this installment. In the previous installment, I got the radio working after a recap on some of the capacitors. Some had already been replaced. In particular, I put these three guys in here. The rest of this work had already been done with the new resistors and mica caps. And it seems to work okay. Now, there are a few issues. One, the power switch. It's very flaky. That contact had been bent out of position. I pushed it back, but it's still not making good contact, so I want to bend that a bit and secure it where the rivet is with some glue, because I'd really like to get the original power switch working if possible. Also, the fuse holder was a little flaky. I think some cleaning on that, and maybe also a little dab of glue on this contact, which is also loose. I'll take care of that. I got some crumbly wiring I want to replace. And that should take care of the radio's basic functionality. Now, there is another issue that came up. I had some comments about powering this radio. So it was meant to be powered off of several potential AC line voltages, 110, 150, or 220. Well, around these parts we've got about 120, so I have it set up for the 110 configuration, which is to just bypass this entirely. Now, this resistor is strictly for the series tube filaments, and that's it. Doesn't drop to B+. This radio is powered right off the AC line, both for the series tube filaments, but also it gets rectified, half-wave rectifier, to provide B+ for the radio. So the higher the AC line voltage coming in, the higher your B+ is. So with only about 110, 120 volts coming in, with only a half-wave rectifier and a kind of a small filter cap of 4 microfarad on either side of a filter choke, I didn't measure it, but it's probably only around 120 volts DC powering this thing. Well, if I was to get 220 coming in, I'd have more like 220 plus, maybe a little higher, B+ powering the set, so there'd be like twice as much voltage on the plate of this tube, which is in series with the speaker voice coil. Remember, there's no output transformer. High impedance speaker, 2 kilo ohm. That's the plate load resistor, essentially. So radio, I would suspect, will perform quite a bit better. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a readily available 220 volt AC supply. I can poke around and see what I can come up with. But for sure, I want to make sure the radio is capable of running on 220. So I want to replace that wire, test out this power resistor. And, oh, I'd mentioned about putting a thermistor in it. Well, the filament current on these tubes is really low, and they don't seem to make thermistors for that low a current. Remember, a thermistor needs to get hot to work properly. The hotter they get, the lower the resistance. Most thermistors are made for around 1 amp to 10 amps. I don't recall what the exact filament draw is on these, but see the fuse in this thing is only 0.2 amps, so it's got to be considerably less than 1 amp going through these tube filaments. So the thermistor is not going to get very warm. It's going to stay fairly high resistance. It's going to kind of starve these tubes of power. Well, what I think I'm going to do is add a series resistor. I got a comment about adding a 33 ohm resistor in series with the tube filaments, so I think that's what I will do. The reason you want to do that, when tube filaments are cold, they're lower resistance, so when you turn a radio on, there's a surge current, and it could potentially blow a filament open or shorten its life. Put a resistor in series, or better yet, a thermistor. When you turn it on, it resists the current flowing through the tubes quite so much, so they will heat up a little bit more slowly and reduce the chance of burning them out. Alright, so that is the battle plan there. Fix the power switch if at all possible, replace the crumbly wiring, add a resistor in series with the tube filaments, and see if I can find a way to get 150 or 220 volts AC to go into this. Now, I do have a variac. I can crank that up all the way, which Well, if that meter's right, it will do 150. So perhaps I can test at least a 150 tap fairly easily. Here's a little progress update. I used some deoxit D5 and got the power switch working pretty reliably, so happy about that. Happy enough that I'll remove these blue shorting wires. And I ended up putting the 33 ohm resistor actually in place of that shorting wire. So now when you're at the 115 volt tap, you got the 33 ohm, and when you're at the 150 volt tap, you've got this section of resistance, which is about 700 ohms plus 33. And when you're all the way at 220, this is out of the circuit, but you've got about 2.5K here, so the extra 33 is what make a difference. Unfortunately, I went to move this from the 115 to the 150 position, and as soon as I put a little bit of torque on that screw, it snapped this metal band right there. I'm thinking this is probably some really cheap pot metal, so not quite sure what I'm going to do about that. It looks like this is just exposed resistance wire here, and this is just simply acting as a clamp on it. So I imagine I can replace this with something else. It's a shame, or maybe I can salvage one from the other chassis. I don't recall if it still has this part or not, but if it does, yeah, I'll see if I can make use of that parts chassis after all. Yeah, it sure does, but it's a different style, so I'll have to think about that a little bit. I also haven't tested this one in the forefront, so I'm not sure it's good. Well, after thinking about it a while, I decided to just carefully remove damaged tap there. After all, 150 volts AC is not something you would see in the U.S. I'm not sure what countries, if any, use that standard, so I don't think it's really a big loss to remove that, and it preserves the originality. I do like the way this resistor looks, and it seems to be in good working condition. But I still would like to do the test with my Variac to boost the AC line voltage in as much as possible, but I need that filament dropper to be an increased value. So what I did is I disconnected the shorting wire here and installed a power resistor. Now if you recall, this tap measured about 700 ohms. Now you might be thinking, oh, we'll use a 700 ohm resistor, or maybe 680. That would be the closest standard value. However, you'd be wrong, because both ends of this resistor are still in the circuit. So this resistor is in parallel with this resistor, and this resistor is 2200 ohms. So if you do a little math, putting about 1000 ohms in parallel with 2200 gives you approximately 700. So let's give this a try. Okay, I've got it powered up, and that power resistor is getting pretty toasty, so if I was going to use a configuration like this long term, I definitely want to use a beefier resistor there. So according to my Variac, I got about 150 volts AC going in. Let's try to tune something in. Sorry about the background noise, the washing machine is going. With the new workshop in the basement, you're going to occasionally hear some utility noises from the adjoining room.
So, you know, if I buy apples, they're imported. Yeah. But, you know, those grafted trees where, you know, the five... I just think those are the dopiest things ever. I guess they work, but it just seems weird to me. It is weird, but the worst part is you're not sure what... So,
Still as finicky as ever to tune, but I would say that is definitely louder.
What's on your show today? It's Fruit Talk with Rich Cowgill. Yeah, that's what we're doing. We should.
And I'm not surprised. Running this in a higher B+ makes a lot of sense that it would increase the volume, being is that the speaker is directly in series with the plate at the output tube.
I'm like, no, that's not fair. Do it because we can, but I have a mango tree growing, avocado tree that we just grow from pits. You know what I mean?
I suspect this will be a little bit easier to operate when it's in the cabinet with a plastic knob on there, because clearly my hand is having a pretty substantial effect on the tuning. Since I'm just touching the bare metal there. See if I can find the knobs. Yeah, I think I see one. Here it is, tuned into WGN. With both knobs on, it definitely helps, not only because it's shielding the hand effect, but also the larger diameter gives you a little bit finer control, but it is still quite a challenge to tune a station in. Between the tuning dial, the antenna coupling, and the regen control, plus the various antenna taps, it takes some work. And once you tune one station in good, if you want to go to another station, you have to really repeat the whole process over again.
The White Sox are 1-12 in the second half.
But it is an interesting process. That's for sure.
Kluber. The gates are now open in Bourbonnais. The Bears. 6 teams have made trade offers for Cavalier star Kyrie Irving. According to ESPN, the Spurs, Clippers, Suns, Nets, Heat, and Timberwolves are acquired. College hoops 5-star freshman Mitchell Robinson is left word of Kentucky. That's only 2 weeks after he enrolled. Robinson missed a workout on Thursday. Then coaching staff came to his dorm. The room was empty. Robinson was not responding to anybody from the school.
Alright, so let's see if I can get another station in. Also, I have trouble getting this control to its full right angle extent with this being out of the cabinet because this bumps my workbench.
There's a constitutional process to take up my mandatory veto, which they should do immediately.
Plans for a Friday news conference were canceled. Instead, the governor's office.
I also suspect this radio would work better with a real earth ground. I'm noticing bringing my hand to it really boosts the signal. So I'm thinking the antenna is hardly the optimal setup. I'm using well, I'm down in the basement, which also doesn't help, and I'm using a piece of wire 20 feet long, I'd say, but no ground connection.
The event actually starts off on August 4th.
That's something I'll have to rig up down here. Now I have the luxury of doing that because, well, I'm down in the basement. I've got the actual ground for the house. I have easy access to it on the utility panel or a cold water pipe. But right now it's pretty far from my workbench. So that's something I can easily hook up right this second. Probably being in the basement has a bigger effect with the antenna though, rather than the ground, I would think. I have trouble with reception on all my radios down here.
They had kind of had some bad luck there, but yeah, Quintana, very good again. Cup starters 10-1 with a 2.54 here.
Well, I'd like to really get in there and clean this cabinet well, but I don't want to get any dirt or damage the grill cloth, so I'd like to take the speaker out. Now notice there are 4 screws holding it in place. I was a little nervous given my bad luck with cheap hardware on this radio. I didn't want to risk cracking or damaging anything, but luckily these screws turn very easily. Yeah, the bracket comes out. So there's a little bit of padding. It goes against the speaker, so I don't think I'll have any trouble getting this out. Should only have to take 2 of these out and just loosen the other 2. Which I've already done, so loosen this a little more. I was wondering how the grill cloth is attached, so I'm not sure that's glued in or it was just held in place by the speaker. Oh, now we can get a look at the speaker. So we do have a little bit of corrosion down in there, but I'm not going to risk trying to get that off. Cone's in good shape. More insignias on it. It's a Saba. Insignias everywhere, don't they? There's not a whole lot of metal in this. It's basically just this. This basket is made out of some composite material. Seems kind of like masonite. And a paper cone. Just a little bit of metal down in there. And some felt around the cone. So you got one little ding there. Seeing how the grill cloth is intact, I wonder if that happened way back in the day. Well, now let's see if the grill cloth comes out. No. I believe it is glued to the cabinet. Maybe I can carefully... Well, I will try to very, very carefully around the edge and pry it up. If I can't, I'll just leave it in place and just have to be careful when I clean it. It's not worth damaging it. Here's a product I'm using, good old Novus number 2. I've used it on many projects in the past, but with big light and plastic. It's a very fine abrasive. And it's a scrap of an old cotton t-shirt, and work it around. It will actually take off a very, very thin layer of the surface. So a lot of people, when they see that brown, they think, oh, it's nicotine or tar from smokers, but, well, some of it might be, but actually it's also a little bit of the Bakelite material itself. I mean, that's what fine abrasives and polishes do. They take away a very thin layer of the surface to level it out. Also remove any gunk that's on it. I mean, I cleaned it already, but there seem to be some imperfections in the surface that weren't coming out easily with the basic cleaning product. In other words, soap and water. Alright, so I'm going to rotate this around to a clean surface periodically. Go until you get it all off. I switch to a cleaner cloth. Yeah, it's coming out real nice. One trick I've heard about that I don't think I'll need for this is to use some shoe polish. If it's really dull and lifeless, but this is pretty darn shiny. Surface is a bit rough, but I mean that's from when it was actually made. That's just the nature of the beast. But it's pretty colors. Kind of looks blackish under dim lighting, but if you get real bright light on it, see it's actually kind of a very dark brown and actually reddish, kind of marbled together. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up. So I'll keep working my way around that speaker grill cloth. And when I get down in here, it's going to be a little bit trickier. I may have to get a soft brush of some sort, some toothpicks to get into all the nooks and crannies. It was tedious, but definitely worth the effort. And this may be a cheap radio inside, but they actually did a pretty good job molding this Bakelite cabinet. I ended up using a toothpick. Was able to get into all the nooks and crannies, and some Q-tips as well. It's especially grungy down in where that dial opening is. Alright, so final step. Put it back together and let's hear it playing one last time. Alright, here it is, all back together and playing. Definitely a finicky radio to tune.
He's still good enough to win.
But hey, it does work.
On the field for. And again, the play calling to let him be who he is.
That way. Yeah, because, Damien, as you know, coming back from an injury, there's
Not booming volume, but certainly listenable.
Going out there and trusting yourself to do everything that you can do on that injury. Yeah, listen, if I step between the white lines and those, if I step out there, everything else goes out the window. Excuses,
Yeah, it's not
everything.
too
I
bad.
don't hear anything.
Not too bad
if
at
you're
all.
stepping out there on the field, then the expectation is I'm going to play like the guy that I was before, and that's the bottom line.
Real Cloud's in amazingly good
Packer fans
condition
love
too.
to see that.
compared to the
If
original.
they can get by Carolina, then it gets really interesting. Although Carolina is going to be a very, very tough opponent. All right, we got that.
I hope you guys enjoyed this look at restoring a DKE 38 radio
for the division.
from, well, 1938 or so in Germany.
Dollar Shave Club not only gets you an amazing shave.
Any sentence of even Hitler didn't do stop. There's no even Hitler.
April 11th, 2017. Quote. Is doing. Yeah. He brought them into. He brought them into.
The Holocaust
Yeah.
Yes, they were. They learned about the Holocaust. They were like little retreats that they went to. God.
I mean, gosh.
It's a never-ending
a lot
concept.
a lot of it is, for me, what comes out of.
Gas put off the gas horrible yesterday, posting losses of 0.3%.